I just want to say thank you for joining me on the Prospect On Show. I'm here with an absolute legend from so many things. You've probably read one of his books, saw one of his posts from Sirius XM. I have Shane Malloy, and thank you so much for coming on. And I just want to get down to it. Like I want to know about you, learn about your story, about how you got started and everything. Like everything I've heard is just incredible.
Well, that's a crazy journey. I started back, I did a little bit of writing, kind of like 97, 98, 99, when, the internet was still pretty young, and websites were pretty hokey. So, I started like sort of dabbling in it. And about 2000 is when I really started. So it was the first draft that I covered. It was in the at Calgary Saddle Dome. 2000 was the first draft. And I started writing. We started doing some stuff for like Hockey's Future way back in the day when they actually like produced content. So I'm really dating myself. That was 25 years ago. So this year was my 26th draft that I had covered. So we did a little bit of that and dabbling in that. And how I really got my break is a gentleman named Peter Lenavalli. He was a Finnish reporter who moved to Calgary, and he happened to move next door to me. And so he had credentials to the Calgary Flames. What he had, most importantly, was an NHL media guide. And they were at the time they were really hard to get a hold of, and it was a real written book. But what it had most importantly was everybody's phone number and email from every publication, every team, so you had access to everybody. And so what I started doing was contacting these people looking for work. And what my interest was is really writing about prospects, about because what I thought was really it was the one area that no one really talked about. Like in our day, when I first started, no one cared about prospects. This industry didn't exist. There was Bob McKenzie and there was the draft guide from NHL.com, and that was it. Like there was literally nothing out there. There was like stuff on Hockey's Future and a couple other small websites. These were like the real geeks of the geeks, like the 1% of the 1% that were really interested in that. So what I ended up doing is I kept emailing people, and finally Scott Wilson from Fox Sports, I convinced him, to start writing about prospects. And his idea was is to have a Baseball America for hockey, and it didn't exist. And Fox Sports had the rights in the United States. So I decided that what I could do is I could write about all these different leagues, and I'll get some writers, and we had a contract together, and that's what we started doing. So I had a bunch of different writers across. I handled the dub and overall, and I had somebody in the O, in the Q with Chris McCluskey in the USHL and the American Hockey League, and then we'd have the different tournaments like the World Juniors, and we started writing about that, and that lasted probably for about 5 years, and then what as I was going through that type of work, Russ Kona and I we would do prospect shows. And it was called internet radio. Well, the podcast didn't even exist at that time. So we knew people from the NHL head office. So we would go do these tape recordings at a bunch of their different events. It would be All-Star Game, or they were doing player events or collectible events or the draft. And we would do these pre-recorded shows, and they would put them up on their website. So we had done that for quite a few years. And then finally, XM came into existence, and they were going to have, it was called Home Ice. So it's NHL Network Radio. So we knew some people at the NHL head office, Russ and I, and we contacted them and said, hey, do you know the programmer at XM? And they go, yeah. So we got a hold of Joe Thistle, and we told him what we'd want to do. We want to do a show about prospects because no one, not many people know about it. We want to kind of be like the Baseball America for prospects. He goes, okay, that's a good idea. So I was living in Vancouver. Russ drove from Philadelphia to Toronto, got into the studio. Mick Kern was our producer at the time. We got a hold of Gus Katsaros, who we knew who's writing some stuff for McKean's. He came in as our guest. We did 20 minutes. And then Joe goes, sounds great. You have a show. Starts in 2 weeks. Now, Russ and I didn't know how to run a radio. I didn't know how to run a board. I didn't know anything about the software. I'd never been a host before in a radio show. So I actually had to learn all of that on the fly. Like 2 hours before our first recording, I called up a guy I knew who worked for CKNW in Vancouver, and I did a barter trade. I would come on and be a guest and wouldn't get paid for their hockey stuff, and then I could use an edit room to record the show. So I went up there 2 hours earlier, and I got a tech to show me how to run the board and run the software and how to save everything and send it off. And I listened to a bunch of radio shows and wrote down scripts. So pre-script everything, intros, outros, scripts, and off we went. And I had everybody's phone number because of the media guy, but also I knew people from being at rinks. When I go to a game, like I never sat with the media. I always sat in the corner with the scouts. That's how I learned. So that was the journey of starting Hockey Prospect Radio in 2005. And how I had the opportunity to learn how to scout is I was living in Calgary, and Craig Button happened to be the GM in Calgary at the time. And I told him what I was working on and what I was writing about. And he goes, well, the best thing you do is learn how to scout. I'm like, well, how do you do that? There's no manual. Like, there's no school. Like, how do you learn how to scout hockey players? So he gave me sort of this really basic template, and I'd go to Calgary Hitman games. And I ended up sitting in the media scouts room, and I met with Patty Janelle, who was a longtime coach in the WHL, with the Flin Flon Bombers. And then Lauren Davies, who's a longtime scout with the Edmonton Oilers, Stanley Cup winner. I was sitting beside them, and I was telling them what I was working on. They go, well, you want to learn how to scout? Come sit beside us. Here are the rules. You can't talk during a game, and you can't, you can only talk during a whistle break or intermission. You can ask questions. So for like a couple of years, that's who I would sit beside and all the other scouts. So I'd never sit in the media box. I always sat at the corner of the rink with the other scouts. So if I was going to write about prospects, I had to learn how to evaluate. And I can tell you this, learning to scout is way harder than grad school. It's so monumentally difficult. You're trying to figure out a 17, 18-year-old kid into a 23-year-old man. It's incredibly difficult. So I ended up just kept going to games. I'd go to junior A games. I'd go to Hitman games. I'd go to NHL games. And I'd just go to games constantly. And then I moved back to Vancouver, and they had a greater variety of games I could go to. So I'd go to the BC Hockey League. I'd go to the Dub. I'd go to the American League. I'd go to the NHL all in the same week. So I'd be going to like 5, 6, sometimes even 7, but usually 5, 6 games a week. And I did that for more than almost a decade. And that's how I learned. I just kept going. And then I'd go off to tournaments and then go to OHL, see games, go to the Q to see games, go see tournaments, go see college. And that's how I learned. I just kept going. But I would never sit with the media unless I was forced to. And even when I did at NHL games, I asked the PR staff, they didn't really realize why I was doing it. I asked them, can I sit beside, I want to sit right here. And it was the first media seat next to the pro scouts, the NHL pro scouts. So I, built relationships with those guys, and that's how I'd learn. So I'd learn from the amateur guys and the pro guys. And the main thing is I just couldn't tell, like there were always things I couldn't tell. So this, the caveat is keep your mouth shut, keep your ears open, learn, and don't repeat anything that you've heard ever. So I could write probably 5 or 6 books on things I'm not allowed to say. Like I have like dirt on all kinds of things, but I have to take it to the grave because that was the agreement. And that's how I learned. We just grinded it. It wasn't fancy. Trust me. When I started, no one cared about prospects. We're living in the golden age of hockey prospects. When I started, nobody cared. I remember Terry Jones telling Russ and I in 2001 at the draft in Florida, why are you writing about prospects? Nobody cares. Like, you're not going to make a career out of that. And legitimately, nobody cared. There wasn't people like you and I. There was me, and some guys at Redline, and some guys at Hockey's Future, and Russ. Like, NHL.com didn't even have prospect writers. When it first started, they first started writing about prospects, was Russ and I. We did it on contract for the NHL, and Phil Coffey was our boss. And we would do like weekly columns and then go to the draft. And he would just say, okay, you guys find the stories. Go ahead. Because Mike Morale and Adam Kimmelman hadn't been hired yet. And we did that for 3 years. So that was how it all sort of like came together. So that took up until about 2007, 2008. I was did stuff for Fox Sports. I did stuff for NHL.com. I had written for the Sporting News, did some stuff for Sports Illustrated on prospects. I did some stuff for TSN, did some stuff for Sportsnet. And this was up until like 2008. So there's a good 8 years of just bouncing around and writing about prospects and going to games and not sure if it would go anywhere because still we were like screaming into a void. And we started our show in 2005. So we were the only ones on the block. It's an entirely different world, Anthony, compared to what it was before.
Sounds like you're just getting started. No,
Yeah, almost. Yeah, we really were. It was actually we were it was the Wild West. We were just doing whatever we could to get to games and get paid for it and cover prospects, and we were super passionate about it. And we knew, like, Russ comes from the baseball side, so he knew the value of Baseball America and talking about the young kids, and we just kept at it. We were pretty relentless about that. So in 2010, I ended up writing a book called The Art of Scouting about how scouts scout. So I had about 55 scouts, pro and amateur from the NHL, all contributed. And my interest was just to get from their perspective because no one talks about the scouts. They're mostly like forgotten. The GMs get all the love, but the scouts are like they're the lifeblood of hockey. They do all the gritty, dirty work. And I really wanted to write a book on, to make sure people knew what they did and how they did it, but also to pay homage to all the people that helped me. Like without them, I would never be what I wouldn't have a career. So I wanted to give something back to them. So I wrote The Art of Scouting in 2010 and it came out in 2011. So it's been 14 years. I think I'm going to end up doing an updated version at some point once I'm done university. But yeah, it's been a crazy journey. And then a lot of the stuff I've been doing the last 10 years has been most academic writing on hockey. So I've been just plugging away on that and keeping the radio show going. And yeah, just games and prospects and talking about prospects. And I love it. It's great.
what's the best tip or advice you've ever received?
Oh boy. Best. Recognize that if you're evaluating players, you're the biggest problem. You're your biggest problem. Not the players, not the coaches, not the league, is your own perception and perception of what's really going on. Recognize that it's all about you internally, and it's a lifelong lesson. So, like when things don't go right, you got to look yourself in the mirror, and that's a hard thing to do. And like, yep, I'm the problem. Like I could probably strip the paint off the walls. How many times I said profanities trying to work things out or try to figure things out in scouting. Whether it's like player evaluation methodology or player ranking methodology or building database systems, or just trying to figure out players. Like there's times I've gone to a rink, I'm like, as Bill Armstrong said, it's like sitting there with a cardboard box in your head. Like, what am I watching here? Like, I don't know. Did I get anything out of this? Right? And you end up being your own worst problem. So you have to have really good feedback loops and be honest with yourself, but stick to what you think. And it's a continuous iteration of learning, but recognize, yeah, if any mistakes are made, it's you. Look in the mirror because it's usually always you.
What's like the biggest mistake other than perception that you see in scouts that aren't as successful as others? Like, is there a proponent of scouting a player that you think is overlooked?
I think the B game of players, their off puck play is sometimes we get really enamored with the play with the puck, even though it's a really tiny percentage of the game. So if you think of it from this perspective, say you were a top end player, top end forward, and you're playing 18 minutes a game, 20 minutes a game, you may only have the puck in your stick 5% of the time. So what are you doing the other 95% of the time to help your team win, whether your team has the puck or not? So much of it's off puck play. And I think sometimes we get so enamored by what a player does with the puck, we fail to recognize the massive value of what a player does off the puck. And I think that was been my biggest lesson, and not get caught in also recognizing the value of statistics and points, because not all points are equal. Not all goals are equal. Like you can watch a junior player rip up 100 points, but how many of those points are actually valuable or just garbage points? Maybe 50% of the points are garbage. They don't matter. You're playing against a team at home that is below 500 and you're ripping them up on a power play and you whip 3 points on the board. Is it really translatable as the talent pool compresses to the American League into the NHL? No. So to me, it's really about understanding the environment a player plays in. What is the most difficult in terms of cognitive situations and environment that mentally and emotionally, what is the most difficult place for them to play? And I like to judge players on that. So, on the road, back-to-back nights, 3 and 4 nights, if it's possible, against teams above 500, above 600, above 700. How do you perform? Right? That microcosm of that. Because what I end up starting to learn was what I'm trying to recognize is behavior in players in those circumstances. And then when you recognize their behavior, you start looking at their habits because habits build behaviors. Behavior is your results. And hockey players are no different regardless of their age. And the earliest you can learn that about a player, the better, which is why sometimes you'll see in draft lists, the small skill player is so much higher up on lists, but then he doesn't get drafted high. And people are like yelling at the NHL teams, oh, wait a minute, this guy consensus was X, in the top 20, but he was drafted 50 or 60th overall. There's a reason for it because, scouts will understand what their value is in the league. Like NHL is still big boy hockey. Right? It's one of the lessons I also had to learn is I was making some mistakes when I went back. How I judge my list is not how many players of my list get drafted. I don't care, or where they get drafted. It doesn't matter to me. Say hypothetically, 60 players go on to play more than 200 games in the NHL. Minimum benchmark is 200 games. Then I go back and I figure out, okay, how many of those 60 players are in my top 60 list? That's what I judge myself on. And I'm like, okay, did I identify those players properly? And going back and understanding, you take a look at what GMs and organizations value at the trade deadline. What do they value at free agency? And then how is the playoff played? Because I think sometimes we kind of forget what hockey's really like. And then we get to the playoffs and it's a wake-up call again. So I take those three aspects and I apply it back into the draft. What type of what positions, what playing style, what skilled attributes, what mental emotional attributes apply in the playoffs? What is coveted by teams in the playoffs, free agency, and a trade deadline? And I apply that back to my list and I change the weighting appropriately. Now, do I have my own biases? Sure. Power forwards, I was notoriously biased towards power forwards, right? One, based on scarcity, they're so rare, supply and demand. So I weighted them too heavily and I had to adjust that over time. And that's just changing iterations in the system that I have because my system is I don't build a list. The system actually builds a list for me. So as I do my scanning reports in particularly numerical value, I put it into the system and it automatically spits out the list for me. Now, what I can do is it goes into, as you know, tiers, right? There's tiers. If you look at my list, you'll see tiers in my explanation for it. And why I built that is I put safeguards in place to protect myself from myself, right? Because that's my biggest problem. So I can move players around that tier, but I can't move them above and I can't move them below, right? So it's all based on this weighting of value, whether it's their position, their playing style, their shot, their skilled attributes, their playing biases, mental, emotional, right? And statistical, analytical analysis. And then that's how I put that together. So those are the biggest lessons. Internal feedback loops are really helpful. Having mentors, people that you can bounce things off. Remember, your mentors are not always right. It's about that conversation about learning to get better. Having a feedback loop is great, internal and external, and iteration, and just getting better at that. It was interesting. It was a conversation that we ended up having with Stephen Ellis and Russ and you after the draft about, really trying to understand off puck game and how valuable that is. And so, hanging around scouts is the best thing you can do, right? And their interest in you is going to be, is he passionate? Is he obsessive? Or she, for that matter, doesn't really matter, male or female. And do you work hard? And do they see you at the rink all the time? They don't want to see, they're not interested in people that just do stuff online and watch video. They want to see you at the rink, learning, getting better, right? Because you have to be at the rink. Video is not enough. It's a really small little window. You got to be at the rink to learn what's really going on. The context and nuance is at the rink. And then video and analytics and statistical analysis and biometric information and um, cognitive information are tools that just add to that. But for me, it's you got to be at the rink.
So, how many live viewings and scouting hours do you need to put into a player to be satisfied with the evaluation process? I mean, it could be all
For
different,
me
but yeah.
at this time, I'm at live views 6, maximum 10. I'm good. And then the rest is I can use video because then I start going into isolation into certain areas depending on obviously the position and the playing style. And then I will go through and watch like it's a defenseman. I'll rip through, hundreds of puck retrievals. Because what I'm looking for is habits and behavior of that. So I can isolate that. Oh, prior to that, it could be might needed 15 or 20 views. But as you become more refined, I think the biggest thing is being able to push away the noise of what's around you and around that player, and just really just focus on that individual player. And in many cases, 80% of the stuff out there is noise, and you just have to sort of remove yourself from that and be really and just think about it from your own perspective. And that doesn't mean you don't value other people and you're not friendly with other people, but you really have to become internalized in that to get better. Otherwise, you end up relying on other people, and that's dangerous. I'm not a fan of consensus at all. I think consensus is dangerous. So you have to stick to what you think, and then just keep improving upon that. And ask yourself a lot of questions. Have a lot of internal dialogue. So I know in the past, and that may sound crazy, but I'll have 3 or 4 voices in my head. Like, is that right? What do you think? I don't know. That doesn't make sense, right? Like, because I'm trying to like work these questions out about these players in my mind and trying to fend off the biases that I have, right? Because a lot of the things that we do are prejudgment. Also, a lot of it's based on intuitive decision making. So it's pattern recognition and experience that we've had in the past. So that comes up pretty heavily. So we got to find other ways to help offset that. Otherwise, you can get caught in a tunnel vision. So, you know, those are some of the best advice that I can give. These are things that I've learned from other scouts, but also from my own trial and error. Like if I showed you all the accumulation of road rash I've had from wiping out and making mistakes, I got lots of skeletons. I started off with a single closet, then I went to a double closet, then a walk-in closet, then I had a single garage, then a double garage. So I just keep pushing the skeletons in there. And yeah, every year. I always end up having 2 players on my list that I probably either rank too high or too low. And then there's a couple people I ask, I'm like, okay, outside perspective, where's my problem? Where are my 2 biggest problems? And they'll point stuff out, both of them. And then I'll have to go back and think about it. And generally, I end up having to correct both of them.
Well, I looked up internal dialogue because I had read something that only 30% of people have internal dialogue. And to me, because I learned this in college and then I wanted to look back up to see if there was a percentage. It says 20 to 30% of people report having internal dialogue. And I feel like something that's important is, first of all, how do you not talk to yourself over and over? I am always talking to myself or in my head based on a specific prospect or anything in this space. But it is interesting that you said that because, like, when you're going to these games and you're evaluating them based on not just their play, not just what you see on video, but after, are you looking directly at them on the bench, how they interact with their teammates, coaches? Is there something there that you can view that you can't view on video? Like, what are you looking for?
Body language, how they speak to their teammates, their body language when things go bad, like especially when things go bad. I want because I'm looking for behavior. I'm looking. There's a difference between when you're watching a player. There's choices and there's decisions, and they're 2 different things. So a decision would be, you grab the puck around the net. You're a defenseman. first option is usually your best option. You move the puck efficiently, you follow it up and try to find space to be an option for your defenseman. Good decision. A choice ends up costing you personally. So that being, are you willing to take a hit to make a play? Are you willing to block a shot? Are you willing to go to the net knowing you're going to get punishment? Do you battle in front of the net as a defensive player and like smash and knock people out of there? Like, are you always in the battle hard for loose pucks? Right? Do you, if you're going to go in on a one-on-one puck battle, do you pull the shoot or you just go in? Right? I understand consistently who makes the best choices. Like who makes those choices consistently? Because that matters. That's a big part of your B game. So you can use Brady Martin as an example this year. Incredible B game because he's absolutely dedicated to the B side of his game. He makes great choices. And will that cause him some punishment? Of course it will. That's part of the sacrifice. There is what's good for the individual and the group, right? And sometimes there's people who are just interested in the individual, and if it benefits the group, great, but that's not my priority. And what I'm looking for is the players that understand what's great for me as an individual and the group, and that is one and the same decision that they make. It's like because a choice is a conscious choice. You're consciously stepping in front of that puck to eat it from the point, right? That's a conscious choice. Everybody can make pinpoint quick decisions under stress or not stress in that respect. And the other thing I had to learn from a scout as well is understanding this game is not as complicated as we like to think it is. It's really about time and space. Like, and I watch for players that can create time and space and take away time and space. If you can do that, all your other skills, that's gravy. But you got to do that, right? And sometimes the most boring players are by far the most effective.
I was actually going to bring up Brady Martin because when you had talked about what Stephen Ellis calls his like awakening moment in scouting, when you said a player might only have the puck for 5% of an 18-minute like game or whatever it is, like Brady Martin rose on my board because I'm like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. I was only thinking about, LJ Mooney, how he handled the puck and does all of the skill set, but when you look at like the B game, as what you said for Brady Martin, it just made sense more. Do you think more scouts and teams think about it like that as well? And do you think there's like a different mindset for all regimes, but for scouting, I mean, for evaluating players, it seems like best player available would be the best thing to do, but it seems like teams are drafting for need more. What do you see it as? You need to take best player available every single time, and those regimes, might not even be there for that pick to prosper. Like, what are your thoughts?
Well, I find best player available a bit of a nebulous term because it's best player available based on what you value as an organization, which doesn't mimic every other organization or myself or you as individuals, right? What my value system could be different. Jason Bucco likes to tease me. He finds like my stuff, I'm much more risk averse and I'm much more conservative in terms of what my list looks like comparative to other people. Now, that doesn't mean I don't have like the smaller skill players on there, but if you are, you have to be elite if you're a smaller forward. Like you have to have some elite elements. Otherwise, because what ends up happening, if your A game doesn't work, you don't have a B game to fall upon, right? And you don't have the C game, which is size, right? So you don't have that advantage. So, and that's the same with smaller defensemen. This year, 2025 was the first year that a sub-6 defenseman wasn't drafted, right? It's the first time it's happened in decades. So it's one of the things that sort of jumps out and understanding, yeah, you can be a 6-foot defenseman, but like say you look at Cameron Reed, well, what do you need to have to succeed if you're a 6-foot defenseman or smaller? You have to have elite hockey sense and you got to have skating and you have to have like really good defensive habits because you have to take away time and space that you don't have when you're 6'4" and you have longer limbs and a longer stick. Like that extra length matters. That's the difference of 6 to 8 inches. Well, that's the difference between somebody getting through between you and your defenseman or along the boards, right? That kind of stuff matters. So for me, it was really going back and understanding again, sometimes we get caught in narratives. So we'll watch the regular season and then the playoffs hit and we go, oh, we're reminded. Like this year, like last couple of years, everybody's talking about the big bruising Florida Panthers. This isn't new. The LA Kings were built the same way. The Vegas
Ducks
Golden
back in the
Knights
day.
were built the same way. Tampa Bay was built the same way. Um, Chicago was built in a very similar way. So Tampa was built in a very similar. The only team that's won the cup that was more of an anomaly compared to those was Colorado, and they were a one-off. So when we hear this talk about, oh, everybody's going to start drafting these players and it's a league where everybody mimics everybody else, a copycat league, well, nothing's actually changed. The winners of the playoffs in the last, say, 2012, when LA won their first, to now hasn't changed. It's still big boy playoff hockey, right? And if you're a smaller player, you got to bring some elements of your game. That doesn't mean you can't succeed. It happens. Like, I'll use an example of a player that initially was really a one-dimensional player in Connor Garland. When he played in Moncton, he was a small skill player who was very one-dimensional. But when he got into the American Hockey League, I mean, he was sat down and said, "Hey, kid, if you want to play in the what do you want to do? You want to be the best scorer in the American League, or do you want to play in the NHL?" And he started developing that B side of his game, and now is a really responsible two-way 5-on-5 player. I'd have him on my team. I'd have him on my team in the playoffs because he understands that off puck play. So it's not to discount small players, but that's part of the thing when you're identifying players is when you're talking to them. You know, it's a really good key I use. I try to figure out what they think of themselves. What's their self-identity? Because when I hear players say, "Oh, I think of myself as a Drew Doughty," I'm like, "Really? Like, have you watched yourself play?" Like, I'm not being mean, but it's like it's the players that have a better understanding of who they are, really have a better understanding of succeeding. Because what happens is if you have an identity and I'm this skill player and I do X and that's what I do, but when you get to the American League, talent pool compresses. You got almost everybody's like you. And then NHL, like you may have been a top player in your CHL team or college team, but you may now be struggling to be an F9 on a third line. And if you don't adapt your game and change your identity, like you'll be in the American League or you're going to be in Europe. And that's just the way it is. So I really try to find the players who cognitively understand who they are so that they're more likely to be adaptive, have more, that adaptive aspect of their personality. I'm looking for learnability, how quickly you learn and how you learn, how adaptable you are in terms of that situation. And, you know, your understanding, you have to be obsessive. The player has to be obsessive. Like it's such a small percentage to make it.
Mhm.
It's such a small percentage.
So let me ask you this. Say you're a GM and your team is in a rebuild. Like, how would you get out? Is it something that would you start specifically drafting defensemen or goalies because they take longer, or like what would you prioritize?
If I'm a general manager, one, my first priority is not even worried about players.
Mhm.
That's the least of my concern. My first priority is who I'm hiring. Because I look at it from a business perspective. I've been an entrepreneur, but my all my education is business. Um, so I look at it from this perspective. The players on the ice are just a result. They're the profit. They're the result of the decisions that you make in your amateur staff room, your pro department, your player development, your management group, your coaching staff in the American League, and in the NHL. So if your team doesn't play well, don't blame the players. Blame yourself. Blame the management group. You're to blame, 100%. It's based on your decisions. So from that perspective, first, I'm going to hire the best people I can find, smartest people. Like I want to hire smart people that will argue with me. Like I'm looking for A type
Yeah, not
people.
yes men. Yep.
No, can't have it. No, they got and with each other. So there has to be some about 80% alignment of, you know, what your vision is and what your philosophies are, and then 20% you need to have that free flow of ideas and creativity mentally. It's really important to have that clash. So, but to answer your question about the draft, um, I look at what are the most valuable areas of your hockey team. What areas have the biggest scarcity, which have the greatest long-term value, which positions and playing styles have the hardest supply and demand. So So for me, it would definitely be defense and center, and I would draft a goalie every year. I'd find who is the best goalie scouts in the league, and I'd pay them whatever they need to be paid. How much do you want? Because like if you can get them, great, right? And I have them their own separate department, and their job is only to scout goalies, pro and amateur. That's all you do. Don't worry about anybody else. That's a whole department in itself. And the rest, I'd focus on center and defense because you can always find wingers. Always find wingers in the draft. You can always find wingers in free agency. You can always find wingers in the trade market. And 15% of the league is undrafted. So you can find them, right? And a lot of guys that are centermen or wingers were used to be centers, right? They converted over to the wing. So for me, it's down the middle. Buchla, again, Jason Buchla laughs at me. So I want big, lanky, mobile defensemen, 6'3", 6'4". Basically, I want trolls with a wooden club. That's what I want in defense. And then I want centermen that are two-way centermen. If they have the elite offensive ability, great. But the majority of the time, 90% of the time, you're not going to get those players. Maybe 95% of the time, you're not getting them in the draft. Unless you're in a top 10, top 8, it's very unlikely. You might occasionally get them. Patrice Bergeron. Let's see who else would be out there would fit that. But he's definitely one of them that went in the second round. Robert Thomas in St. Louis went in the kind of mid-late 20s. Happens, but it's rare. So I want those type of centermen, and then I want big wingers that go up and down the wing and north-south, bang and crash, greasy goals, go to the net, defensively responsible. I know it sounds boring and vanilla, but look at the teams that have won the Stanley Cup, and they're littered with players like that. Like the Jared Stolz of the world for LA Kings. Love those kind of centermen.
Yeah, wow, that's very interesting. Like when you said the leadership teams, like it makes a ton of sense. Like looking at it in a business world, or if you have a good leadership team, that means that you're probably going to make a lot of profit and succeed. Like when I was doing private investing and things like that out of college, when I graduated in finance, but we would always be taught to look at the leadership team, who is there, because that's when you hire the good people, you need to hire smart people if you're ever going to be a CEO, because they're going to make you look smarter too and make you smarter. So it's really good. When you were talking about that kind of team, it kind of sounded like to me like the Blackhawks popped up. I'm also a Blackhawks fan, but um, I want to ask you, do you think like the Blackhawks with their current roster construction and some of the guys that they have, do you think they're doing it correctly?
One of the things I always like to push forward, um, from my perspective, is there's a difference between buying players and buying time. And in their situation, they're the players that they sign, like the veteran players, they're there to buy time. That's what they should be buying, is buying time. You're buying time for your prospects to grow. This is why I was always concerned about Kevin Korchinski, and they brought him in as a 19-year-old. They may have wrecked him to a degree. I
Yeah.
hope not. I'm crossing my fingers. But when you put a player in that situation, what ends up happening is they change all their habits and their behaviors to survive. So you put a player into survival mode. You change his neuro pathways because everything he did before will not work at the NHL level because he hasn't attained that level of skill set and mastery. So what he does is he reverts back to the most simplest form he can get. And then that's what he builds up that neural pathway, and then under duress, that's what he falls to. Human beings, we don't rise to the challenge. We only fall to our level of habits. So that is a concern when you make those kind of decisions of bringing in guys way too early. Frank Nazar's, like the Oliver Moores. Like I want to keep guys out of the pro league, including the American Hockey League, as long as I can. American Hockey League is like will grind you to the ground. If you're a 20-year-old coming out of CHL or college, you might, even if you're a second round, first round pick, you might not make it. There's actually a better chance you won't make it. So I like to kind of keep those players away. So from Chicago's perspective, is insulate those kids as long as you can. Keep them away from the NHL. Don't worry about the yelling or the noise from fans or media. Ignore it and keep them away as long as you can. And just keep filling that cup up with some veterans to not only mentor them and bring them along, but also to keep them out of harm's way as long as possible. Because the frontal lobe of their brain hasn't finished developing yet. So that's higher reason decision making. That generally doesn't happen until you're about 23, which is why all players tend to peak not necessarily peak, but that's when they start to explode in their production. It's generally around that 23 mark. Even if you're a really good player and you've been playing in the league for a few years, that 23 mark tends to click. It's why car insurance companies drop their rates at 25. It's not by accident, is particularly for males, we're slower developing in that area. So we really need draft plus five to get to that point. So even if you're a young player in early, it's a struggle. So I'm hoping Chicago, for the fans' sake, because they have great fans, is to be as patient as you possibly can. Like time is their greatest asset. So they just like they got all these young players. Be patient. Know that when Bedard is 22, 23, that's when you start roster construction. That's when you really put your foot down, is when he hits about 23, because everyone around him is going to be about 23, 24, 25 in that, like really in that wheelhouse of 22 to 24. That's when you start pushing the gas, and they're not quite there yet.
And you've been around for so long. Can you tell me like your favorite memory you have in the space and like also the moment where you were like, I made it. Like this is my life.
Ooh, favorite moments. I mean, one is every year going to the draft. I love the draft. It's my Christmas time. One, I get to see everybody, so it's cool. It's like a convention of like prospect geeks, so it's fun. Um, that is fantastic. When the green light goes on at the draft and we're on air because we host a show live for Sirius XM for NHL Network Radio. When that they say 5 seconds, you're all amped up, and because I'm with Steve Coolius, who's like he's a tornado, so you just hang on for dear life. That is a highlight every year. I love it. It's super fun. That act, other factor is being accepted by the scouts, being considered one of their peers. I got to a point where they without saying it, they sort of nod at you like they've accepted you as one of your peers. You've earned it. Doesn't matter how long you've been around, just like you've earned that respect. I had worked as a scout as in the USHL as well, and I had been to, probably scouted like somewhere around 2,500 live games and been in Europe and, 15, 20 times. It's, that nod of acceptance, and you're just one of the guys. Doesn't matter that I'm like partially on the media side. It didn't matter. Um, and writing my book, The Art of Scouting, that was a pretty cool moment because for me it was, giving homage back to the scouts who helped me. Particularly behind my head, if you can see that, there is a Doug Wilson retro jersey. So Doug Wilson was the GM in the Sharks at the time, and him, as well as Joe Will, who was their AGM, and Tim Burke, who's one of the greatest guys you'll ever meet, assistant GMs. I asked if I could sit in their meetings to write some chapters about that for my book, and they said, not a problem. So I had full access to their meetings, and it was a super fun time. And so, yeah, great memories of interviewing people about the book and just hanging around the scouts. Like, I guess other media people, they're like coaches are their guys, or players are their guys, or GMs are guys. The scouts are my guys. Those are my people, right? So when I go to games, I hang out with those people.
That's awesome. Like what was the best memory at a game you've ever remembered? Like, wow, that just happened.
Oh, that's easy. That's the World Juniors in Ottawa. That whole sequence with Jordan Eberle and John Tavares and like that whole I was like right on top of the action. So we were in the press box and I was on that side of the ice. And just to be standing up and over top and watching that, as much as how cool it was to be there for obviously Sid's golden goal, and I've been to, I don't know, 18 or 20 World Juniors, 20, I don't know. They started to blend all into one, Europe in there, but that moment was pivotal because it was just so clutch. And yeah, that was probably the best. And I've been at Stanley Cup finals and covered Stanley Cup finals and saw winning championships and really excited for the people for those organizations, but that was a pretty pivotal moment.
Well, I just want to thank you so much and, give you this time to promote and anything that you're working on, as well as, tell the audience, what you got going on next.
Going on next, well, we have all this summer for on Hockey Prospect Radio on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio. We're gonna do a total review of each team for all the draft for the 2025 draft. Then we have 4 draft efficiency shows. We'll talk about 06 to 15 and the NHL drafting efficiency for each club. And then we're going to do a farm system review. We won't talk about the kids that are just drafted, just the draft 24 and later, and we'll do that. So that's pretty much about next 11 weeks of the show. And then that and the rest, I am fully immersed. I'm actually completing my PhD. So it's actually on hockey operations is the topic. So I'm doing a PhD in interdisciplinary studies. So I'm just getting through my data, finishing up my data collection. So just trying to grind through that. And yeah, that's basically it been my summer. But it was fantastic to finally meet you at the Prospect On. So it was super fun at the draft. And I hope you really enjoyed hanging out with all the old guys that do the draft every year. And for us, for guys like Russ and I, we think it's our responsibility to help mentor and help the next group because we may only be kicking around for another decade or so. So now you guys got to pick up that big rock that Bob McKenzie left us and trudge and push that thing up the hill.
Well, I appreciate even being in that conversation because, this is just amazing. I had so much fun with you guys, like meeting Russ and Michael as well at the combine. Like they took me under their wing there. It was my first combine too, so that was always amazing. And yeah, I just thank you so much for coming on and telling me all this stuff. Like I'm sure all the fans that are trying to get into this too learned so much. I mean, you are a hockey prospects encyclopedia. You might have been the original edition. So it's amazing to hear everything from you. So thank you
Well,
so much.
I give credit to Bob McKenzie. He paved that way for us, and then the rest of us sort of came in behind him. And it was my job just to make it easier for everybody else. So it's a really good collective group of people that work in this industry, and it's growing, it's getting bigger. So I'm happy to come on anytime. I remember when I first started, people gave me the opportunity to be a guest on their radio shows. So for me, if anybody ever asks if they have a podcast, I always come on. If I can find the time for them, I will.
Awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much. And peace out, guys.